Ruth Calloway pressed her dead husband's scarf against her newborn's face to keep the baby from crying. Because if the baby cried, the boys would panic. And if the boys panicked, she would break. And breaking was not something she could afford to do in the middle of a Wyoming blizzard with 3 children and no one coming. She had driven past every house on the Miller Road, every window dark, every door shut. One property left between her and the open nothing. One man everyone in Clearwater had warned her about. She picked up the reins and drove straight at his gate. If this story moves you, subscribe to this channel right now and hit that notification bell, because this one doesn't end where you think it will. Follow every word to the very last sentence. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Ruth's story travels. The winter of 1878 came to Clearwater, Wyoming, like a judgment. Not like weather, like something decided. By the second week of November, the snow had swallowed the lower fence posts on every property east of the river. By the third week, 3 families had loaded their wagons and gone south without saying goodbye to anyone. The ones who stayed stopped talking about leaving and started talking about wood. How much they had, how long it would last, whether it would be enough. In Clearwater, in the winter of 1878, enough was the only word that mattered. Eli Harding had enough of everything except reasons to care. He'd been that way for 7 years. He didn't advertise it. He didn't explain it. He woke before dawn, worked his 40 acres, paid his debts at Agnes Porter's store in exact change without small talk, and rode home before anyone had the chance to say more than his name. People in Clearwater had learned the shape of him the way you learn the shape of a thing you can't move. You stop walking into it, and you route around it, and eventually you stop thinking about it at all. They knew he'd been a federal marshal. Some of them knew pieces of why he'd stopped. None of them knew all of it. None of them had gotten close enough to ask, and Eli had made sure of that, with 7 years of deliberate, practiced distance that had hardened from habit into something closer to architecture. He was splitting wood behind the barn when Agnes Porter's boy rode up hard from the south road. The boy stayed on the horse. That told Eli everything about what his mother had said before sending him. "Mr. Harding." The boy's voice was tight with cold and something else. "The Calloway widow's wagon broke an axle on the Miller Road, 2 miles east of your line. She's got 3 children. One of 'em's a newborn, sir. Born 6 weeks ago." Eli split a piece of pine, set another one up. "Sheriff Tucker?" "Up north, back Thursday." "Reverend Cole?" "His horse went lame yesterday." Eli split the second piece. The boy watched him. "My ma says the temperature dropped 8 degrees since midnight," the boy said. "She says if someone doesn't get out there in the next hour—" He stopped. "She says the baby, sir." Eli set his axe against the block. He looked at the sky. The clouds were the color of old iron, and they were moving fast and low, and there was nothing in them that suggested mercy. "Tell your mother I heard her," he said. The boy hesitated. "That's all?" "That's all." He heard the horse turn and go. He stood with his hand on the axe handle, and he looked at the clouds, and he thought about a newborn in a broken wagon in 8 degrees of dropping cold. And he thought about the 7 years of structure he had built that required nothing from him that he wasn't willing to give. And he thought about all the very reasonable things a man tells himself when he has decided to stop caring about the world outside his fence line. He went inside and got his coat. He found the wagon on the east bend, exactly where the boy had said, buried sideways in a drift. One wheel cracked through at the hub. The canvas cover caved in under a night's worth of snow. The horse was still standing in the traces with its head down. The horse was going to be fine. Eli tied his own animal to the wagon wheel, and went around to the back and pulled the canvas up. She was already looking at him. She had dark eyes that hadn't slept, and a face that was doing the specific work of a person holding themselves together through will alone. Jaw set, shoulders square, everything arranged into a shape that said, "I am managing this," even when managing this was the most expensive thing she'd ever done. She had a baby wrapped tight against her chest in a man's wool scarf, dark blue, worn through at one edge. Both arms locked around it. On either side of her, pressed close for warmth, two boys, the older one with his jaw set in an echo of hers, the younger one staring at Eli with enormous brown eyes that hadn't decided yet whether he was safe. "You're Eli Harding," she said, not a question. "Yes, ma'am." "I've heard things about you." "I expect you have." "None of them were good." He looked at the cracked wheel, then back at her. "I'm the only person who showed up." She held his gaze for 3 full seconds. He watched her calculate. Not him specifically, but the situation, the temperature, the baby against her chest, the boys on either side. All the variables laid out against each other with the speed of a woman who had been doing hard arithmetic alone for months. "All right," she said. "What's the plan?" He didn't answer. He just started. He got the boys out first. The older one dropped into the snow without help and turned back immediately to reach for his mother, which was a reflex too ingrained to be taught. It came from practice. The younger one reached for Eli's hand and then looked startled at himself for doing it. "What's your name?" Eli said. "Henry. Everybody calls me Hank." The boy looked up at him with those wide, deciding eyes. "Are you the dangerous man?" "Hank." Ruth's voice, flat and tired from inside the wagon. "I'm just asking what Mama said." "I heard what you said." Eli looked at the boy. "Can you walk?" "Yes, sir." "Then walk. Stay next to me. Don't let go of my coat." Hank grabbed a fistful of Eli's coat with both hands. "How dangerous are you?" "Hank." Ruth had gotten herself to the wagon's edge. "Not now." "I just want to know before we go to his house." "We're going to his house because it is the only house," Ruth said, and there was a blade of exhaustion in it that cut through everything else in the air. "Now let the man work." Hank looked at Eli with an expression of child's solemn assessment. Then he nodded, as if something had been decided. "Okay," he said. "I believe you're okay." Eli said nothing. He turned back to Ruth. She had the baby in one arm, and she was trying to stand, and he could see that her legs had gone half dead in the cold. He held out his hand. She looked at it. "I don't need—" "Mrs. Calloway." He kept his hand out. "Your legs are frozen, and you're holding a 6-week-old child. Take my hand." She took it. He pulled her upright in one steady motion and held until he felt her balance settle. She didn't thank him. She just got her footing and moved toward the tail of the wagon. And he respected that more than anything she could have said. The older boy had not moved. He was standing in the snow, watching Eli with dark, careful eyes that held nothing warm in them, and nothing that was going to give anything away. The boy had a face that knew things it hadn't been old enough to know, and had filed them somewhere deep, and wasn't going to let anyone near them. "Sam," Ruth said, "let's go." Sam looked at his mother. Then he looked at Eli one more time. Not afraid, not hostile, just measuring, with the specific arithmetic of a child who has learned that adults can change without warning, and that it's better to see it coming. Then he turned and walked. The walk to Eli's property was 20 minutes. In those 20 minutes, the wind shifted north, and the snow came in sideways, and Hank never let go of Eli's coat. Ruth walked at his left, with the baby against her chest, and she did not speak, and did not ask for help, and did not once lose her footing on the ice. Sam walked behind them where he could see everything. Eli felt him back there the whole way. Inside, he built the fire up high and pulled the 2 chairs nearest the stove and told Sam, without making it a request, "Sit your brother there." Sam did it without acknowledging him, which was fine. Eli didn't need acknowledgement. He needed the boy warm. Ruth had not sat. She stood in the center of the room with Grace against her chest, and she looked around the way people look when they're trying to understand where they've landed. Eyes moving to the woodpile, the single plate on the shelf, the 2 cups, the table set for 1. The total absence of anything that suggested this house had been built for more than 1 person. "You've been alone a long time," she said. 7 years. She looked at him steadily. "Why?" "That's not a question I answer." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she said, "Fair enough," and she sat down in the chair by the stove. Not defeated, just deciding that the battle wasn't worth the ground it cost. He went to the cabinet. Flour, salt pork, dried beans, half a jar of apple preserves from last fall. He got the pan hot. Hank had been watching him from the chair with the focused attention of a scientist. "Mr. Harding." "Yeah?" "Are you making food?" "Yes." Hank turned to Sam. "He's making food," he said, in the specific tone of a younger brother sharing information the older one should appreciate more. "I can see that," Sam said. "I'm just saying it's good." "I know it's good." "You could say thank you." Sam's jaw tightened. He said nothing. "Sam?" Ruth's voice was quiet. "He's right." A long beat. Sam looked at the floor. Then he said, without looking up, "Thank you, Mr. Harding." It cost him something to say it. The cost was visible. Eli didn't make it worse by responding. He put the beans on and sliced the pork and kept his back to the room, because the room was full of people, and he was out of practice with that, and keeping his hands busy was the only reliable management he had. Behind him, Ruth spoke to the baby in a voice so low it was almost not a voice at all. Just a sound, the particular frequency a mother uses to tell a child that everything is going to be all right, whether she believes it or not. Hank asked Sam something in a whisper. Sam said, "Stop asking me things I don't know." Then quieter, with a different texture, "Just eat when he gives it to us." The fire cracked. The wind hit the north wall hard enough to move something in the rafters. When Eli turned around with 2 plates, Hank was already more asleep than awake, tilting sideways in the chair. Sam was still upright, still watching, still working that arithmetic in his dark eyes. Ruth had the baby quiet against her chest, and she was looking at Eli with an expression he couldn't immediately place. Not gratitude, not relief. Something more specific and harder to name. "You don't have to do this," she said. "The salt pork is already in the pan." "That's not what I mean, and you know it." He set the plates on the table. "Eat, Mrs. Calloway." She opened her mouth to say something else. Then Grace made a small sound against her chest. Not a cry, just the soft, searching sound of a newborn, checking that the world is still there. And Ruth looked down immediately, and completely the way a mother's attention goes when a child speaks. Like everything else, simply stops existing. "Shh," she said. "Shh, baby girl. We're warm. We're all right." And Eli turned before he could stop himself, because the way she said, "We're warm," plain and exhausted and completely without performance, just the simple relief of a woman who had not been warm in longer than tonight, turned him without his permission. He looked at her. The firelight, the blue scarf now loose around Grace, the 2 boys pressing together in the chair, Sam's arm shifting in his sleep to a better angle under Hank's head, without waking either of them. All of it in his house. All of it breathing in his house. He looked away. He served the food. They ate. Hank ate with the concentrated efficiency of a child who had learned not to waste anything placed in front of him. Sam ate without looking up. Ruth ate everything on her plate with one hand, Grace in the other arm, and she ate fast in the way of someone who had been giving more than her share to the boys and thought no one would notice. He noticed. When the plates were empty, the silence changed, became something less urgent. The specific quiet of people who have made it through the worst part of a day and are standing now in the strange, uncertain territory on the other side of it. Sam broke it. He'd been building to something for a while. Eli had felt it gathering in him across the meal, the way weather gathers before it moves. "Mr. Harding." His voice was flat and direct. "Why did you come out today? Everybody said you don't help nobody." "Sam." Ruth's voice, a warning. "I'm just asking what's true." "It's all right," Eli said. He looked at the boy. "I changed my mind." "About what?" "About staying in." Sam looked at him. "Just like that?" "Just like that." The boy's eyes narrowed slightly, still calculating. "Why?" "Because someone needed help, and I was able to give it." "People need help all the time," Sam said. "You didn't help them." Ruth said, "Samuel." "He's right," Eli said. Ruth stopped. Sam blinked. He hadn't expected agreement. "You're right," Eli said again. And he didn't soften it or explain it away. "I didn't. Tonight I did. That's all I've got." Sam held the stare. Something moved in his face, briefly, and then he locked it back down with the practiced control of a boy who had been doing that since October. "Papa said a man who changes his mind when it costs him something is worth more than a man who never had to," Sam said. His voice was careful and contained. "He said the first kind is rare." The room held that sentence for a moment. "He sounds like he was worth listening to," Eli said. "He was." Sam looked at the fire. "He's dead." "I know." "Typhoid." Sam said it the way you say a word you've had to repeat so many times, it stopped meaning anything. "October 3rd. Grace was born October 19th. She never met him." He paused. "He didn't know she was a girl. He thought she'd be a boy. He was going to name him after his father." Ruth was very still. "What would he have named a girl?" Eli said. Sam almost smiled. It didn't make it all the way to his face, but it was close. "He would have asked Mama. He always asked Mama. He said she was smarter than him about everything important." He looked at his mother then, just briefly, then back at the fire. He wasn't wrong. Ruth pressed her lips together and looked at the ceiling, and then back at her son. "Go to sleep, Sam." "I'm not tired." "I know. Go to sleep anyway." He pulled Hank closer and leaned back in the chair and closed his eyes, and inside of 4 minutes he was out the way children go out. Instantly, completely, like a light. Ruth looked at Eli across the quiet room. "He hasn't talked that much since October," she said. Her voice was low. "Good talking or bad talking?" She looked at her son. "Real talking. The kind he stopped doing when Daniel died." She paused. "He decided it was his job to be the man of the house. 11 years old, and he just decided. Wouldn't cry in front of me. Wouldn't ask for anything. Just started carrying it." She looked back at Eli. "I couldn't talk him out of it." Eli looked at the boy in the chair. He knew that posture. He had worn it himself at 11, and at 20, and at 30, and he was wearing a version of it right now. "He'll carry it till he finds something worth putting it down for," Eli said. Ruth was quiet for a moment. "What made you put it down?" "I haven't." She looked at him steadily. "No," she said after a moment. "I don't suppose you have." He went to the window. The snow was still coming, thick and horizontal in the wind, and the road was gone entirely under it, and everything past the tree line was just white nothing. "You'll stay tonight," he said. "Road's not passable. Temperature's still dropping." He paused. "Boys can have the back room, 2 blankets in the chest." "And us?" "You and the baby take the room. I'll be fine." "I'm not taking your bed, Mr. Harding." "Eli." "Eli." She said it carefully. "I'm not taking your bed. You have a 6-week-old child and you haven't slept. You're taking the bed." She opened her mouth. "Mrs. Calloway." He said it flat and final. "It's not a discussion. It's what's happening." A long beat. She looked at him with something that was trying very hard not to be amusement. "You're very decisive for a man who took 40 minutes to change his mind about driving out here." 40 minutes is fast for me." She pressed her lips together. The almost smile came and went. "All right," she said finally. "Thank you." He picked up the plates and carried them to the wash bin and stood there with his back to the room. Behind him, Grace made a small sound. Not a cry, just a question. The sound of something brand new testing the air. And then Ruth's voice, low and steady. "I've got you, baby. I've got you." Eli stood at the wash bin, and he did not move. He had a badge in a wooden box in the top shelf of his wardrobe that he had not opened in 7 years. He knew exactly why he'd put it there, and exactly what it stood for, and exactly what it had cost the last time he'd told himself that someone's safety was his responsibility. He knew all of that. He'd had 7 years to get very familiar with all of that. He dried his hands. He banked the stove and added 2 pieces of wood, and he checked the latch on the door against the wind. He stood there with his hand on the wood, and he listened to the fire and the wind and 3 children breathing in his house, and a woman who had knocked on his door in a blizzard with nothing left but one word. He thought about Daniel Calloway, who had laughed a lot and built things and asked his wife about everything important because she was smarter than him about everything important, and who had died of typhoid fever on October 3rd and never got to meet his daughter. He thought about Sam carrying it alone since October, 11 years old. He took his hand off the door. He sat down in the chair by the window, and he looked at the fire, and outside the blizzard pressed against the walls of the house, and somewhere in the dark, the road back to whatever he'd been before tonight disappeared completely under the snow. And in the back room, 2 boys slept, and in his bed, a woman named Ruth held a baby named Grace in a dead man's blue scarf, and finally, closed her eyes. And Eli Harding sat in the chair by the window and watched the fire burn and did not sleep. And the room was warm, and the room was full, and both of those things were completely new, and he did not have a single word yet for what that meant. But he stayed. That was the part that would matter later. He stayed. He was awake before any of them. That wasn't unusual. Eli had not slept past 4 in the morning in 7 years, and the body learns what it lives. And what his body had learned was that the dark hours before dawn were the safest ones, the hours when nothing was expected of him, when the world outside his fence line was still, and he could move through his own house without the weight of anyone's presence pressing against him. Except this morning, there was presence everywhere. He heard Grace first, a small, searching sound from behind the closed bedroom door. Not quite a cry, just the particular frequency of a newborn surfacing from sleep and checking whether the world was still arranged correctly. Then Ruth's voice, lower than the sound, already awake, already answering before Grace could escalate. Then silence again. Then the soft sound of the floorboards taking weight, careful and deliberate. The step of a woman trying not to wake anyone else. Eli was already at the stove. The door opened, and Ruth came out with Grace against her shoulder, both of them rumpled with sleep, the dark blue scarf hanging loose around Ruth's neck, where she'd used it as a wrap in the night. She stopped when she saw him. She looked at the stove, already hot, the coffee already going, and something moved in her face that she controlled quickly. "You didn't sleep," she said. "I slept some." She looked at him the way she'd looked at him across the wagon the day before. Direct, assessing, not willing to be managed. "You slept in the chair." "Chair's fine." "Eli." "Coffee's ready," he said. "Cups are on the second shelf." She looked at him for another moment. Then she went to the shelf and took down a cup and poured. And she stood at the counter with Grace on her shoulder and her hands wrapped around the cup and her eyes closed for just a second. The specific, private expression of someone receiving something they needed badly and hadn't asked for. "Thank you," she said. She wasn't talking about the coffee. "Don't." "I'm going to say it whether you want me to or not." "Then say it and be done with it." She almost smiled. "Thank you." She opened her eyes. "For the bed, and the food, and the fire, and the fact that you drove out in a blizzard when every other person in this county decided it wasn't their problem." He poured his own coffee. "I told you, I changed my mind." "You keep saying that like it explains something." "It explains everything." She looked at him over the rim of her cup. "No," she said. "It really doesn't." He didn't answer that. He went to the window and looked at the road, and the road was still buried, drifts up past the fence posts on the east side, sky the color of pewter and moving fast. The temperature had dropped in the night, the way he'd expected, and the world outside was locked in and white and entirely unconcerned with anyone's plans. "You can't get back today," he said. "I know." "Maybe not tomorrow either. Depends on what comes in." "I know that too." She shifted Grace to her other shoulder and patted the baby's back in that automatic, rhythmic way of mothers who do it without thinking. "I'm not trying to be a problem, Eli. I just need my wagon fixed, and I'll be out of your way." "The axles crack through. I'll need to get a piece from the hardware in town, and the road won't be passable for at least a day, maybe 2. Ruth was quiet for a moment. He watched her absorb this, watched her file it and adjust and recalculate the way she did everything, quickly and without complaint, already working out what it would cost her and how to manage the cost. "We'll stay out of your way," she said finally. "You're not in my way." "You live alone, Eli. 3 children and a broken-down widow are in anyone's way." "I said, you're not in my way." He said it flat, the way he said things when they were decided. "Leave it." She looked at him steadily. Grace made a small sound against her shoulder, and Ruth reached up and pressed her palm to the baby's head without looking. The gesture so practiced, it had become part of how she breathed. "What happened to you?" Ruth said. 7 years ago." The question hit him the way cold water hits. Not painful, exactly, just immediate. He looked at her. She held the look without apology, her eyes clear and direct, and not particularly interested in making him comfortable. "I told you that's not a question I answer." "You told me why you live alone isn't something you discuss. That's not the same question." She tilted her head slightly. "Something happened. Something that made a man walk away from a federal marshal's career and buy 40 acres in Wyoming and spend 7 years making sure no one could get within 10 feet of him. I'm not asking for details. I'm just asking if you're all right." He stared at her. In 7 years, no one in Clearwater had asked him that. Not once. Not Agnes Porter, not Sheriff Tucker, not any of the men who'd known him before. They'd worked around him like a stone in a stream. and he'd let them, and that arrangement had suited everyone fine. "Why do you want to know?" he said. "Because you drove out in a blizzard for my children," she said simply. "And because you sat up all night in a chair so I could sleep in a bed. And because a person who does those things deserves to have someone ask how they are." She paused. "Even if the answer is, 'I'm fine and none of your business.'" He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at his coffee cup. "I'm none of your business," he said. "All right," she nodded, no hurt in it. "Fair enough." The bedroom door opened and Hank came out at speed, still in his clothes from the day before, hair going in every direction, wearing the alert and purposeful expression of a child who was woken with an agenda. "Is there food?" he said. "Good morning, Hank," Ruth said. "Good morning, Mama. Is there food?" "There will be," Eli said. "Go wash your face." Hank looked at him. Then he looked at the pump at the sink. Then back at Eli. "It's cold." "Yes." "Real cold." "The faster you do it, the faster it's over." Hank considered this philosophical framework seriously for a moment. Then he went to the sink and pumped water with the expression of a person enduring something unreasonable for the benefit of society, and washed his face with impressive speed. "Done," he announced. "Your ears," Ruth said. "Mama." "Hank." He washed his ears. Then he came and stood next to Eli at the stove and looked at what was happening in the pan with the focused interest of someone consulting an expert. "What is that?" "Salt pork and eggs." "You have chickens?" "3. Hank nodded, filing this. "Sam's still asleep. He doesn't sleep usually. At home, he gets up before me, and he's always already—" He stopped. Something shifted in his face. "Before, he used to get up before me. Now he stays in bed longer." He looked at the pan. "Mama says it's okay, that people sleep more when they're sad." Eli turned the pork. "She's right." "Are you sad?" "Hank?" Ruth's voice, quiet. "I'm just asking." "It's all right," Eli said. He looked down at the boy. Some days, Hank received this with the gravity of someone being told something important. "Me too," he said. "Some days." He picked up a wooden spoon from the counter and held it like he was prepared to assist if called upon. "My papa used to say, 'Sad is just love that doesn't have anywhere to go yet.'" He turned the spoon in his hands. "I don't know what that means exactly, but it sounded right when he said it." Eli stood at the stove for a moment without moving. "It is right," he said. Hank nodded, satisfied. "I thought so." Sam appeared in the doorway of the back room. He was already fully dressed, boots laced, face arranged into the careful neutral expression that appeared to be his default. He looked at Hank at the stove. He looked at Eli. He looked at his mother. He catalogued all of it in about 2 seconds. "Morning," he said, to no one in particular. "Morning, Sam," Ruth said. "Come eat." He came to the table and sat, and said nothing else. Eli served the plates, and Sam ate without looking up, methodical and thorough, his eyes on the food. Hank talked. Hank talked about the blizzard and about the horse still in Eli's barn, and about whether chickens got cold, and about a boy at school named Chester, who had claimed once that he could eat 16 biscuits in one sitting, and whether that was possible or whether Chester was lying. Sam said nothing. Eli said very little. Ruth answered Hank's questions in the patient, half-present way of a mother who has learned to conduct multiple tracks of attention simultaneously. One on Hank, one on Grace dozing against her chest, one somewhere else entirely. When the plates were empty, Sam picked his up and carried it to the wash bin without being asked. He stood at the bin for a moment, his back to the room. "I want to help fix the wagon," he said. Eli looked at him. Road's not passable today. I know. When it is. Sam turned around. His face was careful and even. I'm not useless. I can hold things and hand tools, and I know how an axle fits because my father showed me on our wagon back in Missouri before we came west. He paused. I just want to help, that's all. Eli looked at him for a moment. All right. Sam nodded once, decisive, and went back to the table. Ruth was watching Eli with that expression again, the one he couldn't place, the one that was more specific than gratitude and less simple than relief. He turned back to the stove before she could say anything with it. The day settled into a shape that none of them had planned. Eli worked. That was what he did, and the farm did not stop because there were people in the house. The animals needed feeding. The snow needed clearing from the barn door. The woodpile needed restacking after the weight of the night's snowfall had shifted it. He worked, and he did not invite anyone along, and he did not suggest company, and he did not say any of the things that might have indicated that the house felt different this morning than it had every morning for 7 years. It felt different. He just wasn't going to say so. Hank followed him to the barn anyway. He appeared at Eli's elbow approximately 4 minutes after Eli had gone out, bundled in his coat, with his hat pulled down over his ears, breathing invisible clouds in the cold air, moving with the cheerful determination of a child who has decided that an activity is interesting and has not been told he can't participate. Eli looked at him. Your mother know you're out here? I told her I was coming. What did she say? She said, don't bother Mr. Harding. Hank fell into step beside him. But I don't think asking questions is bothering. I think it's conversation. There's a difference of opinion on that. What do you think? I think you should ask your mother what she meant. Hank considered this. She meant, don't ask too many questions, he said. But she didn't say how many is too many. So there's room. He looked up at Eli. Can I see the chickens? Eli took him to the chickens. Hank inspected each one with the focused attention of a professional assessor and asked their names and was genuinely disappointed that they didn't have any. Everything should have a name, he said. It's respectful. He looked at Eli. Like your horse. What's his name? Ranger. That's a good name. Hank nodded approvingly. Papa named everything. Our mule was called Senator. He squatted down to look at the nearest chicken at eye level. Papa said names make things real. He said a thing without a name is just a thing, but a thing with a name is... He paused, working to remember the exact words. Is a thing that matters. Eli opened the feed bin. He said a lot of things, Hank continued. I try to remember all of them. Sam remembers more than me. Sam has a better memory. But I remember the feeling of them mostly, even when I forget the words. He stood up. Does that make sense? Yes, Eli said. Hank looked at him with those wide, open eyes. Do you have someone you try to remember? Eli measured out the feed. Yes. Did they say things you try to keep? He was quiet for a moment. There was a man he tried not to think about. Not a woman, not a wife, not the kind of loss that came with sympathy. A man named Roy Deaver, who had been his partner for 4 years in the federal service, and who had died on a Tuesday morning in a situation that Eli could have prevented and hadn't, and who had said the last time they'd spoken about something other than work, that the worst thing a good man could do was convince himself that staying apart from the world was the same as not hurting it. Roy had said that, and Eli had disagreed. And 2 weeks later, Roy was dead, and Eli had spent 7 years trying to figure out which of them had been right. Yes, he said, I try to keep them. Hank nodded seriously. He grabbed a handful of feed and threw it to the chickens with enormous satisfaction. I think that's the right thing to do, he said. I think the people we love, we carry them around, and they're heavy. But it's better than putting them down." Eli looked at the boy, 7 years old. Daniel Calloway had built something in this child, something that didn't have a name but was very real and very present, and had survived the loss of the man who'd built it. That was not a small thing. That was one of the largest things a person could leave behind. "Your father was a good man," Eli said. Hank threw another handful of feed. "Yeah," he said. "Not sad, just certain. He really was." Back in the house, he found Ruth at the table with a piece of paper and a stub of pencil, writing something in a small, careful hand. She looked up when he came in. Her eyes went to Hank behind him. "Did he drive you out of your own barn?" she said. "No." "Did he ask you 40 questions?" "About 30. She pressed her lips together. "Hank?" "He said it was all right," Hank said. He went to the chair by the stove and climbed in with the certainty of a child who has decided that a chair belongs to him now. "We talked about Papa." Ruth's pencil stopped moving. She looked at her younger son. Something went through her face that she didn't try to control. "Did you?" she said, and her voice was very quiet. "He has someone he tries to remember too," Hank said. He picked up the wooden spoon he'd left on the side table and turned it in his hands. "I told him about how Papa said names make things real. He thought that was right." Ruth looked at Eli. Eli looked at the wood bin. "I'm going to bring in more wood," he said, and went back outside before she could say anything. He was at the woodpile when he heard the door. He didn't turn around. He split a piece and set up another one. "You don't have to keep going outside every time I look at you," Ruth said behind him. He split the second piece. "I need the wood." "You have plenty of wood." She came and stood a few feet away with her arms folded against the cold. She hadn't put her coat on, and her breath came in clouds in the sharp air. "He talked about Daniel," she said. "Hank does that. He's been doing it since the week after Daniel died. Just opens up and talks. Sam won't say a word, and Hank talks enough for both of them." She paused. "I used to try to get Sam to talk more. I stopped. He'll get there when he gets there." "He's protecting himself," Eli said. "I know." She looked at the snow. "He was there when Daniel died. Hank slept through it. Sam sat with me the whole night and never made a sound. And I could see him. I could see him deciding, right there, that he wasn't going to let himself fall apart. 11 years old, and he just put the wall up." Her voice was steady. "I know that wall. I built the same one after Daniel." She looked at Eli. "I expect you know it too." He set up another piece of wood. "I'm not talking about my wall, Mrs. Calloway." "Ruth." He paused. He hadn't used her given name yet. She was offering it the way she offered everything. Straight out, no ceremony, take it or leave it. "Ruth," he said. She nodded. "What I'm saying is that you were patient with him this morning. When he asked to help with the wagon, you could have said no, and there would have been a reason to say no. And instead, you just said, 'All right.'" She looked at him with those clear eyes. He needed that. He asked straight. He deserved a straight answer. Most men would have seen a kid in the way and sent him back inside. "I wasn't most men even before I started trying not to be," Eli said. And there was something in it that was almost dry, almost something adjacent to humor, and it surprised him as much as it surprised her. Ruth looked at him. Then she said quietly, "There he is." He looked at her. "The man underneath the 7 years," she said. "He's in there. I've been catching glimpses." She unfolded her arms. Her voice was careful, not pushing, just honest. "I'm not trying to dig at anything, Eli. I just want you to know that I see him." He split the last piece. He stacked it with the others. "Go inside," he said. "You'll freeze without a coat." "Answer me one thing first." He looked at her. "Do you regret coming out yesterday?" she said. "Knowing we'd be here overnight? Knowing the road's still buried? Do you wish you'd stayed in?" He looked at her for a long time. The snow sat on the fence posts, and the air was sharp and white and entirely still. And Ruth Calloway stood in the cold without her coat, with her arms at her sides and her eyes on him, and she did not look away. "No," he said. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded once, turned around, and went back inside. He stood at the woodpile for a while after the door closed. He stood there with the axe in his hands and the cold coming up through his boots, and he looked at the house, at the smoke from his chimney, at the light through the window, at the shapes moving inside. Hank in his chair, Sam crossing the room for something. He had not looked at his own house from the outside and felt anything in 7 years. He felt something now. He couldn't name it yet, and he wasn't going to try. But it was there, small and new and fragile, the way things are when they've just started, before they've had time to become sure of themselves. He picked up the wood and carried it inside. Sam was at the table with a piece of rope, working at a knot with both hands, his brow furrowed in concentration. He looked up when Eli came in, then back at the rope. "That's a sheep shank," Eli said, setting the wood down. Sam looked at the knot. "How can you tell?" "The way you're holding the middle loop. Your father teach you?" "Started to." Sam's hands stilled on the rope. He didn't finish. Eli crossed to the table. He sat down across from Sam and held out his hand. Sam hesitated, then passed the rope over. Eli worked it slowly, talking through each step in the plain, specific way of a man who learned by doing and teaches the same way. Sam watched every movement with that dark, careful attention. When Eli passed the rope back, Sam tried it himself. His first attempt was close. His second was right. He looked at the finished knot in his hands. He didn't say anything. But the arithmetic in his eyes shifted by some small and significant degree, and the wall came down 1/fraction of 1 inch. And Eli saw it happen and said nothing about it, and handed him the next length of rope. That was how the afternoon went. Not with declarations or grand gestures, with rope and knots, and 2 people at a table, one of them teaching, and one of them learning, and the fire holding, and outside, the blizzard finally beginning to slow, and inside a house that had been a structure for 7 years, quietly, without announcement, becoming something else. The blizzard broke on the 3rd morning, not all at once. Nothing in Wyoming broke all at once in November. It thinned first, the way a fever thins before it breaks. The wind pulling back from its full fury to something merely brutal, and the snow shifting from horizontal to vertical, and the sky lightening by degrees, from iron to pewter to something that was almost, if you were willing to be generous about it, gray. Eli stood at the window before dawn and read it the way he'd learned to read weather in 15 years of working land that didn't forgive mistakes. And he thought the road would be passable by afternoon if the temperature held. He had 3 days of them behind him now. He was not sure what to do with that fact. He turned it over the way you turn over something you found on the ground, curious about it, uncertain of its value, not ready to put it in your pocket or throw it away. 3 days. Ruth at his table every morning with grace and strong coffee, saying exactly what she thought and not one word more. Hank following him to the barn every afternoon with questions stacked up like cordwood, burning through them one by one with cheerful efficiency. Sam at the table in the evenings, working rope or watching Eli's hands, or asking questions about the federal service in the careful, sidelong way of a boy who wanted to know something, but wasn't ready to ask it straight. 3 days of the house being full. He could hear them now, behind the bedroom door. Grace's early sounds, Ruth's low response, the creak of the floorboards as she walked the pattern she developed in 3 days of early mornings. A slow circuit of the room that settled the baby back to sleep half the time and didn't the other half. He'd memorized the sound of it without meaning to. He knew which floorboard she always stepped over. He knew she checked the window twice, always twice, before she came out. The door opened. Ruth came out with Grace against her shoulder, already looking at the window. She read his posture before she read the sky. "It's clearing," she said. "Should be passable by afternoon." She came and stood beside him at the window. Not close. A careful, considered distance. The distance of a woman who was very aware of the space between herself and other people, and managed it with precision. Grace made a small sound against her shoulder, and Ruth lifted her hand to pat the baby's back without shifting her eyes from the sky. "We've been trouble," Ruth said. "You haven't. Don't be polite about it." "I'm not polite," Eli said. "Ask anyone in Clearwater." She almost smiled. It was closer than it had been 3 days ago. The almost smiles were getting closer to real ones, and he'd noticed that too without meaning to. "You've been patient," she said, "with all 3 of them. That's not nothing. They're good children." "They are." She looked at Grace. "They're all I have left of him. Of Daniel." She said it quietly, the way she said things that cost her. Straight and without decoration, but with the specific weight of something that had been true for long enough to become part of how she breathed. "Sometimes I look at Hank talking, and I can hear Daniel in every 3rd sentence. And Sam has his hands, the way he holds things." She paused. "And Grace has his eyes." She got them exactly. "I didn't know that yet when I named her, but I know it now." Eli said nothing. He had learned in 3 days that Ruth didn't always need a response. Sometimes she just needed someone to stand still while she said a true thing out loud, and that was its own kind of help. "You're going to be all right," he said after a moment. She looked at him. "How do you know that?" "Because you drove a wagon into a blizzard with 3 children and a broken axle, and when you got somewhere safe, the first thing you did was calculate how fast you could get back on your own 2 feet. He looked at her steadily. "Women who do that are all right. It takes longer for some than others, but they get there." She held his gaze. Something in her face went quiet and deep, and then came back to the surface different. Not harder, not softer, just changed in some way he didn't have words for. "My mother used to say that the ones who keep going aren't the ones who aren't afraid," she said. "She said the ones who keep going are the ones who are afraid and go anyway." She was right. She usually was. Ruth shifted Grace to her other shoulder. The baby turned her face against Ruth's neck with the slow, blind certainty of a newborn who has identified where warmth comes from and navigated toward it. "She died before Daniel. She didn't see any of this." She paused. "Sometimes I think that's a mercy. And sometimes I think I would give almost anything to have her in a room I could walk into." Eli looked at his coffee cup. He thought about Roy Deaver. He thought about the specific quality of missing someone who knew you. Not the version of yourself you'd constructed for other people, but the actual interior version, the one with all its complications and failures intact. The quality of being known by someone and losing them was different from every other kind of loss. It left a particular kind of cold in a place no coat reached. "I know that," he said. She looked at him sideways. "Who did you lose?" "Not a question I know," she said. "Not a question you answer." She looked back out the window. "Someday you're going to run out of things you don't answer, Eli. And then what?" "Hasn't happened yet in 41 years. "No," she said. but things are different than they were 4 days ago." She said it matter-of-factly, not pressing, just noting it the way you note a change in the weather. "Something's different. You know it, and I know it. And I suspect even Sam knows it. And Sam is working very hard not to know things he can't control." He looked at her. She met his eyes without apology. "I'm not making it into something it isn't," she said. "I'm just saying what's true. You can disagree with me." "I'm not disagreeing with you." She held the look for a moment. Then she nodded once and went to pour her coffee, and that was all she said about it. Hank appeared from the back room an hour later, fully dressed except for one boot which he was carrying rather than wearing, and announced that Sam was still asleep and that he'd been awake since before Hank, which meant something was wrong because Sam was always awake first. Ruth looked at the closed door. "Let him sleep. He never sleeps this late. Hank, let him sleep." Hank put his boot on. He looked at Eli. "Will you show me how to do the knot you showed Sam?" he said. "The sheep shank. Sam won't teach me. He says I'll do it wrong and mess up the rope, but that's not a good reason not to learn something." "He has a point about the rope," Eli said, "but bring it here." Hank brought the rope with both hands, ceremonial, the way he carried things he considered important. He sat across from Eli and watched every movement with the same open, cataloging attention that was entirely his own and nothing like Sam's careful surveillance. Where Sam watched for information he could use defensively, Hank watched because he was interested in everything and assumed the world was worth paying attention to. Eli talked him through the knots slowly. Hank's first attempt was genuinely bad. His second was worse. His third was closer than either of the first two. "I did it different than you," Hank said, examining it. "You did. Is mine wrong?" Eli looked at the knot. "It'll hold. It's not the standard way." "But it'll hold?" "Yes." Hank looked satisfied. "Papa always said there's more than one way to do a right thing," he said. "He said the people who think there's only one right way to do everything are the ones who run out of options when the first way doesn't work." Eli tied off the end of the rope. "Smart man." "Yeah." Hank turned the knot in his hands. "Mr. Harding, can I ask you something that might be personal?" "You can ask." "Do you like having us here?" The question landed in the quiet morning air with the simple direct force of something a child says when they have decided that the polite version of a question is less important than the true version. Eli looked at the boy. "Yes," he said. Hank absorbed this. "Even Sam? Because Sam hasn't been very friendly." "Sam's being careful." "He's always careful. He was careful before Papa died too, but now he's more careful." Hank set the rope down. "I told him last night that you were all right, that he should stop watching you like you might do something bad." "What did he say?" "He said I didn't know enough about people to make that call." Hank picked up the rope again. "He's probably right. I trust people pretty fast. Mama says it's a good quality, and also a dangerous one." He looked up. "Do you think it's dangerous?" "Depends on the person." "Is it dangerous with you?" Eli held the boy's gaze. 7 years old, asking a grown man whether he was safe. Asking it straight, without fear, with just the clear, open attention of a child who had decided the answer mattered and was worth the risk of getting it. "No," Eli said. Hank nodded. "That's what I thought." He slid off the chair. "I'm going to go tell Sam." He went to the back room and knocked on the door with his knuckle, 2 quick raps, and opened it without waiting for an answer and went in. Eli heard the low exchange of voices, Hank's quick and certain, Sam's slower and gravel rough with sleep. Then a pause, then Sam's voice again, and this time it had a different quality in it. Something that wasn't quite agreement and wasn't quite argument. Something somewhere between the two that meant he was actually considering it. Eli went to the stove. Grace had been quiet in the bedroom since Ruth had put her down after the morning feed. But as Eli was setting the pan on the heat, he heard the shift, the small, escalating sounds that meant the quiet was over. He heard Ruth's footsteps move toward the bedroom, then stop, then come back. "She's been fussing since last night," Ruth said. She was standing in the doorway with the lines around her eyes deeper than they'd been yesterday. "I don't know if she's getting sick or if it's just—" She stopped. "She's fine. She's probably fine." "Probably." "Don't say probably." "She's not running a fever?" "No." "Eating?" "Yes." "Then she's fine." He looked at Ruth. "You need to sleep." "I've been sleeping." 3 hours at a stretch isn't sleeping. That's surviving. Ruth looked at him. "I know the difference, Eli, and right now surviving is what we're doing." There was an edge in it that wasn't anger. It was exhaustion wearing anger's clothes. And he knew the difference. He'd worn that combination himself more times than he could count. "Let me take her for an hour," he said. The silence that followed had a particular quality. Ruth stared at him. "You don't have to—" "I know I don't have to. Go lie down." "Eli, she's 6 weeks old. She doesn't know you. She'll cry." "Then she'll cry. Babies cry. You can sleep through crying when you know someone else is handling it." Ruth looked at him for a long moment. He could see her working through it. The pride and the exhaustion and the calculation. And underneath both of those, the simple, undeniable truth that she was so tired her hands had developed a faint tremor that she was trying to hide by keeping them busy. "1 hour," she said. "Go." She went to the bedroom and came back with Grace bundled in the blue scarf. The baby was awake, eyes open, doing the slow, wondering work of a 6-week-old, taking in the world through a haze of new sensation. She looked at Eli with the specific, unfocused attention of an infant who does not yet know faces, but knows warmth and sound and the feeling of being held. Ruth held the baby out. Eli took her. He had not held an infant he couldn't calculate it, long enough that his arms remembered the adjustment on their own, the instinctive shift of weight and angle, the way you bring them in close to your chest so they can feel the vibration of breathing, the way you don't grip but contain. His hands were large and calloused from 20 years of work, and they wrapped around a child who weighed less than a bag of flour and held her with a steadiness that surprised him. Grace looked up at him. She did not cry. She put her fist against her mouth and looked at him with Daniel Calloway's dark eyes. He knew that now. Ruth had said it. And she breathed the small, rapid, assured breaths of a baby who has decided that her immediate situation is acceptable. Ruth had not moved. She was standing at the bedroom doorway, watching him hold her daughter, and her face was doing something she wasn't trying to control. And it was not a simple expression. It had layers to it, grief and relief, and something older than both of those. Something that looked like recognition, like seeing a thing you'd stopped believing existed and finding it standing in your kitchen at 7 in the morning, holding your baby. "Go sleep, Ruth," he said. He said it quiet, so as not to startle the baby. She pressed her fingers to her mouth for just a second. Then she went through the door, and he heard the sound of her lying down, and within 3 minutes the sound of her breathing changed, and she was asleep. He stood in the kitchen with Grace against his chest, and the fire going, and the last of the blizzard moving off across the Wyoming plain, and the house settling into its morning sounds. Sam came out of the back room. He stopped when he saw Eli. He looked at the baby. He looked at Eli's face. He stood in the doorway with his boots in his hand, not moving. "Mama sleeping?" he said. "Yes." Good. He said it quietly and with real feeling. She doesn't sleep enough. No. Sam came to the table and sat and put his boots on. He did it without looking at Eli, and Eli didn't look at him. And Grace lay against Eli's chest and breathed her small, rapid breaths, and the room held all of it without effort. She likes you, Sam said. He was looking at his bootlace. She's 6 weeks old. She doesn't know who she likes. She knows warmth and she knows calm. Sam finished the lace and started on the other boot. Papa used to say, babies are the best judges of people because they can't be lied to. They just feel what you are. He paused. She's not crying. Eli looked down at Grace. She had closed her fist around the edge of the blue scarf and was holding it with the determined grip of an infant who has found something and intends to keep it. She's got her father's eyes, Eli said. Sam's hands went still on the bootlace. He looked up. Mama told you that? Yes. Sam looked at his sister. Something moved across his face that he didn't bother to hide. A wave of something complicated and private that was grief and love in proportions so close together they were nearly the same thing. She does, he said. She really does. He finished the lace. I look at her sometimes and it... He stopped. He pressed his jaw together. It helps, having her. Even though it's hard. Even though she cries and Mama doesn't sleep and everything is harder with a baby in the middle of all of it. He looked at the fire. She helps. New things do that sometimes, Eli said. Give you a reason to look forward instead of back. Sam was quiet for a long moment. Mr. Harding, he said. He was looking at the fire, and his voice had the particular quality of someone who has been building toward something and has decided to say it all at once before they lose nerve. I know I've been watching you. Like I was waiting for you to do something wrong. He paused. Hank said I should stop. And I've been thinking about it. Another pause. I don't think you're going to do something wrong. Eli said nothing. I think you're a good man, Sam said. He said it the way his father must have taught him to say true things. Straight, without decoration, with the full weight of meaning behind it. I think you came out in a blizzard because that's what a good man does. And I think you sat up in that chair so Mama could sleep, and you showed me the sheep shank, and you let Hank follow you to the barn every single day without one time telling him to go away. He looked at Eli finally. My father would have liked you, and my father was a good judge. The kitchen was very quiet. Grace had closed her eyes against Eli's chest, breathing slow and even, the grip on the blue scarf loosening as she went back toward sleep. Eli looked at the boy, at Sam, 11 years old, who had been the man of his house since October 3rd, who had sat up all night while his father died, who had decided on the spot that he wasn't going to fall apart and had held to that decision through 60 days of impossible difficulty, who had walked into a stranger's house and kept his wall up and studied every angle and finally, this morning, set the measuring down. Your father raised you right, Eli said. Sam held the gaze for one more moment. Then he looked at Grace, sleeping against Eli's chest in the blue scarf, and something in his face went quiet and sure. Will you teach me more knots today? He said. Yes, Eli said. Sam nodded. He got up and went to get the rope, and the conversation was over, and nothing had been announced or declared, and everything had changed. Eli stood at the window with Grace sleeping in his arms, and outside the last of the blizzard pulled back, and the sky began, slowly and without apology, to clear. The road would be passable by afternoon. He would fix the wagon. He would do the practical, bounded, manageable things that needed doing. But he was also standing in a kitchen that was not empty, holding a child who had never met her father and would know him only through the people who carried him forward. and the blue scarf was wrapped around her, and the badge was still in the box on the top shelf of the wardrobe. And for the first time in 7 years, Eli Harding thought about taking it out. Not to put on, not to go back to what he'd been, just to look at it and decide whether the man who'd earned it was someone worth being again. He pressed his hand gently to Grace's back and felt her breathe. That was the moment. Not dramatic, not announced, just a man holding a baby in the thin winter light, feeling something unlock in his chest that had been bolted shut for 7 years, and understanding that the unlocking had already happened, and there was nothing to do now but decide what to do with the open door. He stayed at the window until Ruth woke. Ruth woke at 9:30 and came out of the bedroom with her hair loose and her eyes clearer than they'd been in days. And she stopped in the doorway when she saw Grace asleep in the crook of Eli's arm, and Sam across the table from him, working a length of rope, with his tongue pressed between his teeth in concentration. She stood there for a moment and didn't say anything. Sam looked up first. "Morning, Mama." "Morning." Her voice was still soft with sleep. She looked at Eli. "She didn't cry?" "Twice. Settled both times." Ruth crossed to him and looked at her daughter's face. The slack, perfect stillness of a baby in deep sleep. One fist still hooked in the edge of the blue scarf. She reached out and touched Grace's cheek with 2 fingers. Just briefly, just to confirm what her eyes were telling her. "You let me sleep 2 hours," she said. "You needed 2 hours." "I said 1. "You needed 2, he said again, flat and certain. And Ruth looked at him with that expression he was starting to know. The one that was deciding whether to push back and concluding it wasn't worth the ground it would cost. "All right," she said. She took Grace carefully from his arms, and the baby stirred but didn't wake, and Ruth held her against her chest and stood at the window and looked at the sky for a long moment. "The road," she said, "passable by afternoon, maybe sooner." She nodded. He watched her absorb it, the recalculation happening behind her eyes, fast and practiced. 3 days away from her property. The animals needed checking. The house had been left banked and shuttered, but there were limits to how long that held. She had a life to get back to, a broken life, still in the process of being rebuilt. And 3 days was 3 days. "I'll go to town first thing for the axle piece," Eli said. "Should have it fitted by early afternoon." "I'll pay you for it." "We'll settle it later." "We'll settle it now." Her voice had a clean, particular firmness to it. "I've taken your bed and your food and 3 days of your time, and I'll not add to it. Tell me what the piece costs, and I'll pay it." He looked at her. "You have that money?" A beat. Not quite long enough to mean yes. "Ruth, tell me the cost," she said. "I'll manage it." He said nothing for a moment. He thought about the way she'd eaten on the first night. Fast and thorough, cleaning the plate of a woman who'd been rationing. He thought about the dress worn thin at the elbows. He thought about a woman who'd spent 60 days rebuilding alone on a property that wasn't yet producing anything, with 3 children and no income coming in until spring at the earliest. "I'll keep a tally," he said. "You can settle when you're on your feet." "Eli." "That's not charity. That's what neighbors do." He held her gaze. "You're my neighbor, Ruth. Your property line is a half-mile from mine. That's what it is." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "You're doing it again." "Doing what?" "Making practical sense out of something that isn't entirely practical." The corner of her mouth moved. "It's a very specific talent." "Gets things done." "It does." She shifted Grace to her other arm. "All right, a tally. We'll settle in spring." She paused. "Thank you. And before you tell me not to say it, I'm going to say it anyway. Same as I said yesterday. Same as I'll say tomorrow. Thank you." He got his coat. The road to town was rough and slow. Drifts crossed the tracks every quarter mile, and Ranger picked his way through with the careful, unhurried intelligence of a horse that had done this before and knew that speed in these conditions was for other horses. Eli sat on the animal and let him work, and he thought. He thought about Roy Deaver. He did this sometimes on long, cold rides. Let the thinking come, rather than pushing it back. Because pushing it back had been the work of 7 years, and he was beginning to understand that the work had not been accomplishing what he'd believed it was. He'd thought he was keeping himself from doing harm. He'd thought the wall was protection. For other people. From him. From the specific gravity of his failures that had a way of pulling things into their orbit and destroying them. Roy had not seen it that way. Roy, who had known him better than anyone living, had said 2 weeks before he died that Eli was confusing punishment with wisdom, that staying apart from the world wasn't noble, it was just easier, and calling it noble was the story a man told himself when he didn't want to look at what he was actually choosing. Eli had disagreed. He'd held to that disagreement for 7 years, with the same grip a drowning man holds a plank. He was holding it less tightly this morning. He reached town an hour after leaving, tied Ranger outside the hardware, and went in. Warren Gibbs, who ran the hardware and had for 20 years, looked up from his counter with the carefully neutral expression he maintained around Eli. Not unfriendly, just practiced. The expression of a man who had learned that minimal engagement was the arrangement Eli preferred and had decided to respect it. "Morning, Harding. What do you need?" "Wagon axle. Front hub, split clean through. 22-inch span." Warren went to the back. While he was gone, the door opened and Agnes Porter came in with her boy at her heels and stopped when she saw Eli. She looked at him with the expression of a woman who had sent her son out on a mission 4 days ago and was still waiting to hear the full accounting. "She all right?" Agnes said. No preamble. "The Calloway woman and those children. They're fine. The baby? Fine." Agnes pressed her lips together in the specific way of a woman receiving information that answers the practical question, but not the one underneath it. "They're at your place," she said. "Road was out." "It's been out 3 days, Eli." "Yes." She looked at him for a long moment, the way women of Agnes Porter's generation looked at a man when they were trying to read something off him that he was keeping below the surface. "She's a good woman," Agnes said finally. "That Ruth Calloway. Comes in my store every week since October. Pays exactly what she owes. Never asks for anything extra. I've tried to extend credit twice. She won't take it." "I know." Agnes tilted her head slightly. "You know, she wouldn't take mine either. First 3 times I offered." Something shifted in Agnes Porter's face. Something warm and careful and entirely unsurprised. "Is that right?" she said. Not a question. Warren came back with the axle piece and the conversation closed, and Eli paid and tied the part to the saddle and rode back the way he'd come. And the whole ride back, he thought about Agnes Porter's face when he'd said, "She wouldn't take mine either," and how easily it had come out. Like a thing that was already part of his regular vocabulary, already part of how he talked about his life, without realizing he'd made the reclassification. He was back by noon. He found Sam in the barn with Ranger's harness laid out on the floor in pieces, and Hank sitting on a hay bale, watching him with the patience of a younger sibling, who has learned that the best way to be included in something is to be present and quiet enough that the other person forgets to send you away. Sam looked up when Eli came in. He looked at the axle piece. "That'll work," he said. "You know wagon axles?" "Some. Sam stood and brushed hay off his knees. Papa taught me the basics. He said a man in the West who can't fix what moves is a man who gets stuck. He paused. He said a lot of things about being stuck. He was right about most of them, from what I can tell. Sam looked at him with those careful dark eyes. "You can tell me what to do," he said. "With the axle. I know I'm not strong enough to do the heavy parts, but I can learn the sequence." He said it without self-consciousness, just the plain statement of a boy who understood the difference between what he could do now and what he was working toward. "Come on then," Eli said. They worked the axle together for 2 hours. Eli did the heavy work, pulling the cracked hub, fitting the new piece, setting the wheel. And Sam handed tools and held pieces and asked questions in the same direct, specific way he did everything. And Eli answered them in full, because the boy's questions deserved full answers. Hank lasted 40 minutes before the cold defeated him, and he went inside. Sam stayed the whole time. When it was done, Sam ran his hand along the fitted hub and checked the tension on the wheel the way Eli had shown him. He tested it twice. Then he stepped back. "It's good," he said. "It is." Sam looked at the wagon. He was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Harding." He said it the way he said everything important, building to it, getting the footing right before he stepped out. "We're leaving this afternoon." "Yes." "I know Mama will say thank you. She says it every time." He looked at the wheel. "But I want to say something else." Eli waited. "I want to say that I'm sorry I was hard on you at the start." Sam kept his eyes on the wagon. "I know why I was. I know you know why I was. But it wasn't fair. You came out in a blizzard, and I spent 3 days watching you like you were going to turn into something bad, and you never did." He paused. You were just a good man being a good man, and I made it harder than it needed to be." Eli set down the wrench. "Sam, you protected your family. That's not something to apologize for." "I was rude." "You were careful. There's a difference." The boy finally looked at him. "Is there?" "Yes. Rude is when you don't care about the other person. Careful is when you care too much about the wrong people to let anything near them before you know it's safe." Eli held the boy's gaze. "I'd rather have you careful than careless. Every time." Sam held that for a moment. Something moved in his face, the particular wave that came when a person heard something they'd been waiting to be told and didn't know it until they heard it. "My father would have said the same thing," he said. "Like I said, good judge." They went inside. Ruth had made soup from the last of the dried beans and salt pork, and she'd found a handful of dried herbs in the cabinet that she'd used without asking, which somehow felt entirely right. She looked up when they came in, and her eyes went to both of them. To Sam's face first, reading it the way she read all her children's faces, with the practiced fluency of a woman who'd been doing it for 11 years. And whatever she found there made her look at Eli briefly, and then back to the pot. "Axel's done," Eli said. "Road good?" "By early afternoon, another hour or 2. She nodded. She stirred the pot. The kitchen smelled of the soup and the fire and the specific warmth of a house that had been lived in by more than one person. And Eli stood in the doorway of it and felt, again, that thing he didn't have words for yet. Hank was on the floor with Grace, lying on his stomach in front of her, talking to her in a low, running commentary about everything in the room. Grace's eyes tracked him with the wondering, uncomprehending attention of a baby who doesn't understand words yet, but understands tone. And Hank's tone was warm and constant and delighted with everything it was describing. "That's the stove," Hank was telling her. "It's hot. Don't touch it. And that's the window. And outside is snow. And the snow is cold. Don't touch that either. And that's Mr. Harding. Hank pointed at Eli. He's going to fix our wagon. He's good at fixing things. Sam says he's okay, and Sam is very hard to impress, so that means something. Sam, at the table, said, I didn't say he was okay. I said he was a good man. That's the same as okay. It's significantly better than okay, Hank. Fine. He's significantly better than okay. Hank looked at Grace with great seriousness. He's significantly better than okay, Grace. Remember that. Ruth was facing the stove, and her shoulders were moving with something she was trying to keep contained. And it took Eli a moment to understand it was laughter. Real laughter. Quiet and helpless. The kind that catches you when you're too tired to keep it out. He looked at the table. He looked at the fire. He looked at the baby on the floor, and the boy lying beside her, and the older one at the table, and the woman at the stove, and he thought about the badge in the box on the top shelf of the wardrobe. He went to the wardrobe. He did it without stopping to think about it, because stopping to think about it was how 7 years had happened. And he opened the door and reached to the top shelf, and took down the wooden box, and set it on the bed, and opened it. The badge was there. Federal Marshal's star, worn at the points, the metal gone dull with years of disuse. He'd earned it young and worn it for 9 years, and the wearing of it had been, for most of those 9 years, the thing he was most certain of about himself. He'd been good at the work. He'd been genuinely good at it, and he'd known that, and it had given him a shape, a reason for the space he took up in the world. And then Roy had died, and the shape had broken, and Eli had looked at the badge and understood that being good at something didn't protect the people around you from what you missed, and what you failed, and what you were simply, humanly, too late to prevent. He'd put the badge in the box, and the box on the shelf, and he'd bought 40 acres and built the structure that kept the weather out. He picked the badge up now. It was lighter than he remembered, or his hands were heavier. 30 years of work had put more weight in them. He held it and looked at it, and thought about Roy saying, "You're confusing punishment with wisdom, Eli." He thought about a boy named Sam, who had decided at 11 years old not to fall apart, and was still holding that decision like a man twice his age. He thought about what it cost a person to keep holding something when the holding was the hardest thing left. He thought about Ruth at the stove, laughing at her children. He put the badge in his shirt pocket. Not on his coat, not that. Not yet. Maybe not ever in the official sense. But in his pocket, close, where he could feel the weight of it. He went back to the kitchen. No one had noticed he'd gone. He sat at the table, and Ruth brought the soup over, and they ate, all of them. And Hank talked, and Sam answered in short, specific sentences. And Grace slept in the basket Ruth had fashioned from a folded blanket. And the fire held. And outside, the sky was clearing by degrees. When the bowls were empty, Ruth stood to clear them, and Eli reached across and took hers from her hand before she could. She looked at him. He took the bowls to the wash bin and cleaned them and set them on the shelf. And when he turned around, she was watching him with that expression again, the layered one. And this time, he held the look instead of turning away from it. "I want to ask you something," he said. "All right." "When you go back to your property," he said it even, measured, no inflection that would tip the direction before he got there. "What's the state of it? Honestly." Ruth was quiet for a moment. "Honest answer? Yes. The house is sound. Daniel built it solid. That's not the problem." She folded her hands on the table. "The barn needs work on the east end. The south fencing is down in 2 places. The root cellar is stocked well enough to last the winter if I'm careful, and I'll be careful." She paused. "The income situation it's not resolved." Daniel had plans for the spring planting that I know in general and not in detail, And there are some things about the North Field that I'm not sure of yet. She looked at him steadily. And I have a 6-week-old and 2 boys, and I will manage all of it because that's what I do. But honest answer, I could use help. I don't know how to ask for. You just asked for it. She blinked. I was describing the situation. That's the same thing. He looked at her the way he said things when they were decided, straight and without the preamble that would let her build a defense before he got to the point. The south fencing I can look at this week, while the ground's still frozen enough to work it. The barn east end will wait until the thaw, but I'll get to it. The north field. Tell me what Daniel planned, and I'll tell you if it's sound, or if there's a better way for the acreage. Ruth stared at him. These are things that need doing, he said. I'm able to help do them.
That's what I told your neighbors are. Eli, her voice was careful. You've already given us 3 days. The 3 days with a blizzard. That's done. This is the rest. You can't just... She stopped. She looked at the table and then back at him. Why? He reached into his shirt pocket and put the badge on the table between them. She looked at it. He watched her take it in, the shape of it, the worn metal, the years on it. She looked up at him. I put that away because I decided the world was better off without me in it, he said. I made a mistake that cost a good man his life, and I decided the most responsible thing I could do was stay away from people where I couldn't do that kind of damage again. He held her gaze. Roy would have said that was a coward's reasoning, dressed up as responsibility. He told me that 2 weeks before he died, and I told him he was wrong. And I've had 7 years to figure out which of us was right. Ruth looked at the badge, and? He was right. Eli said it flat and plain, the way he said true things. I've been in that chair by the window for 7 years, telling myself I was protecting people from what I was, and what I actually was doing was protecting myself from the cost of caring about people again. He paused. Your son told me this morning that his father was a good judge. He told me that his father would have liked me. He looked at the table. I have not had a thing said to me in 7 years that cost more to hear and meant more to hear at the same time. Ruth was very still. I don't know what I'm doing, he said. I want to be honest with you about that. I am not a man who... He stopped. He started again. You have 3 children and a property to build and a whole life in front of you that I have no right to make assumptions about. I'm not making assumptions. I'm just telling you that I took that badge out of the box this morning for the first time in 7 years, and I put it in my pocket, because it belongs there, and because the man who earned it is still in here somewhere, and I think he's worth trying to find again. He looked at her. And the finding might take a while, he said, and it might be awkward, and I might not be easy about it. But I'd like to try, if you'd be willing to let a neighbor help with the south fencing. He paused. And maybe the north field. Ruth looked at the badge on the table for a long moment. Then she reached out and picked it up. She held it in her palm, the way she held things she was assessing, carefully, with full attention, turning it once. Then she set it back down in front of him. The south fencing first, she said, and then we'll see about the north field. He picked the badge up and put it back in his pocket. Hank appeared at the table with his coat already on and his hat pulled sideways. Are we going home?
He said.
Yes, sweetheart, Ruth said. Is Mr. Harding coming?
Ruth looked at Eli. He's coming to fix the fence, she said. He's our neighbor. Hank considered this. Then he looked at Eli with those wide, open eyes that missed nothing and pretended to miss everything. Can neighbors eat supper sometimes? Ruth said, Hank, I'm just asking, Hank said, because Mama makes a good supper, and you've been making all the suppers.
It seems fair."
Eli looked at the boy. Then he looked at Ruth. She had her lips pressed together and was looking at her younger son with an expression that was exasperation on the surface and something else entirely underneath. "Sometimes," Eli said. Hank nodded, satisfied, with the air of a negotiator who has secured favorable terms.
"Good," he said. "I'll tell Sam."
He went to get his brother, and Ruth looked at Eli across the table, and the badge sat in his shirt pocket against his ribs where he could feel the weight of it. And outside the road was clear, and the sky had opened up cold and blue and wide. And everything that happened next was already decided, and neither of them had said the word for it yet. And both of them knew it, and that was exactly enough. They drove back in the early afternoon, Ruth's wagon following Eli's horse, down the Miller Road, with the new axle holding clean and solid over the frozen ruts. Sam sat up front beside Ruth, with Grace bundled between them. Hank sat in the back and watched the landscape go by with the focused attention of a boy cataloging everything he intended to remember. The Calloway property looked smaller than Eli had expected. Not in a bad way, just in the way of something that was still becoming what it was meant to be, still in the early stages of being shaped by the people who lived in it. The house was sound, as Ruth had said. Daniel had built it with the particular care of a man constructing something he intended to be permanent. The barn east end leaned slightly under the weight of 3 days' snow. The south fence was down in 2 places he could see from the road. The yard was buried and still, and held the specific quiet of a place that had been waiting. Ruth stepped down from the wagon before it had fully stopped. Old habit, he was learning. She was always moving toward the next thing before the current thing was finished. She went straight to the house and opened the door and went inside to check, and he heard her moving through the rooms, the particular circuit of a woman coming home and confirming that everything she'd left was still there. Sam took Grace from the wagon seat and held her with the careful, practiced grip of a boy who had been helping manage an infant since October and had gotten very good at it. He stood in the yard and looked at the barn.
"East end needs bracing," he said. "It does," Eli agreed. "Can you show me how to do that? When it thaws?" "Yes," Sam nodded. He shifted Grace to his other arm, and she made a small sound of protest and then settled. "She likes to be moved slow," he said. "She hates fast movements. Hank always moves her too fast, and then she cries and he doesn't understand why." He looked at his sister's face. "I've been trying to explain it to him, but he gets excited." "He'll learn." "He learns everything eventually," Sam paused. "He just learns it louder than everyone else." Eli almost smiled. It didn't make it all the way to his face, but it was close, and Sam saw it, and something in the boy's expression warmed by a fraction. Ruth came back to the door. "Everything's fine," she said. "Fire's out, but the pipe's held." She looked at the barn. "I need to check the animals." "I'll do it," Eli said. "Eli, you've got a newborn and 2 boys, and a house that's been closed for 3 days." He was already moving toward the barn. "Go start your fire. I'll check the animals." He heard her exhale behind him, that specific exhale of a woman who has decided that arguing would cost more than accepting. He heard the house door close. The barn was cold, but not dangerously so. Daniel Calloway had insulated it well. Straw packed into the wall gaps, the livestock pressed together in the way animals do when they're managing cold cooperatively. 2 horses, 4 chickens, a milk cow that looked at Eli with a long-suffering expression of an animal that had not been milked on schedule and intended to communicate this clearly. He milked the cow. He fed and watered the horses. He checked the chickens and found 2 eggs that had survived the cold and pocketed them. He worked through it methodically, the way he worked through everything, and the barn was warm enough by the time he was done that his breath was only barely visible. Hank appeared in the barn doorway with his hat sideways and a look of determination. "Mama says you're staying for supper." Eli straightened up. "Does she?" She didn't exactly say it. She said she assumed you'd stay for supper, which is the same as saying it, but more like it was already decided. Hank came in and looked at the cow with great interest.
Did you milk her?
Yes?
Can I learn to do that?
Ask your mother.
She'll say yes if you say it's useful. Hank looked at him with clear calculation. Is it useful?
Very.
Then I'll tell her you said so. He looked at the chickens. Did you name them yet?
They're your chickens.
Hank turned to him with sudden, total seriousness. We can name them right now, he said. I've been thinking about it the whole ride. That one is Agnes, he pointed, because she looks like she's in charge. And that one is Clara. And those two are just called the sisters because they're always together.
That's only 3 names for 4 chickens.
The sisters share, Hank said, as if this were obvious. He looked at Eli. You could name one. I'll pass. You named your horse Ranger. That's a good name. You're good at names, when you try.
Hank,
Ruth's voice came from the direction of the house.
Let the man work.
He's done working, Hank called back. He milked Agnes, the cow, not the chicken. And he fed everyone. And he found eggs. He looked at Eli. Right? Right. See? Hank hollered toward the house. Done. He fell into step beside Eli as they walked back. Agnes Porter in town has the same name as the cow now. Is that weird? Probably don't mention it to Agnes Porter. Hank considered this. Yeah, he said. That's smart. The house was warm by the time they got inside. Ruth had the fire going and the lamp lit, and she'd changed Grace into dry clothes and had the baby in the basket near the stove. She was at the counter cutting the last of something. Dried venison from the cellar, Eli saw. Thin sliced, going into a pan with what looked like preserved onion from a jar.
Sit,
she said, without turning around.
It'll be 20 minutes.
Sam was at the table with a piece of paper and a stub of pencil, writing something in the same small, careful hand Eli had seen in Ruth the morning before. He didn't look up. He wrote with the focused, private concentration of someone working out something they weren't ready to share yet. Eli sat across from him. Sam didn't look up, but he said, "It's a letter. To my father." He kept writing. "I write him sometimes. Mama says it's all right." He paused. "Do you think that's strange?" "No," Eli said. "Some people would. Some people are wrong about a lot of things." Sam's pencil slowed. He finished a line. Then he looked up. "I'm telling him about you," he said. "In the letter." He held Eli's gaze with the steady, particular directness that was his alone. "I'm telling him that a man came and helped us in the blizzard, and that he was the kind of man you'd have liked. And that I didn't trust him at first, and then I did. And that I think you would have said, I made the right call." He paused. "I tell him things I need someone to weigh in on, even though he can't write back." Eli was quiet for a moment. "Does it help?" he said. "Writing it down?" "Yes." Sam looked at the paper. "He answers sometimes. Not in the letter, just, I wake up and I know what he would have said. Like I asked the question in the letter and my brain worked on it while I slept." He paused. "Is that strange?" "No," Eli said. "That's how it works." Sam nodded, satisfied, and went back to writing. Eli sat with his hands on the table and looked at the lamp and thought about Roy Deaver, about all the things he'd said in his head to Roy over 7 years that he'd never written down, never said out loud, never given anywhere to go. He thought about what Sam had said, like I asked the question and my brain worked on it while I slept. He thought that might be the truest thing an 11-year-old had ever said in his presence. Ruth put the food on the table without ceremony. She sat down with Grace in the crook of one arm and a fork in the other hand, and she ate the way she did everything, direct and without waste. Hank ate with both elbows on the table and narrated his food's journey from the pan to his plate to his mouth, with a running commentary that was apparently for Grace's benefit. "This is venison," he told her. "You won't have it for a while because you're a baby. But when you're bigger, it's very good. Papa used to make it with pepper."
"This doesn't have pepper, but it's still good. Don't worry."
"She's not worried," Sam said. "I'm telling her so she isn't."
"She doesn't understand words yet, Hank."
"She understands tone." Hank looked at his sister with confidence. "She knows I'm being reassuring." Sam looked at Eli with an expression of someone sharing the burden of something that could not be reasoned with, but was not unpleasant. Eli looked back at him with the small expression of a man who understood. Ruth watched this exchange and said nothing, and looked at her plate. After supper, after the dishes, after Hank had fallen asleep in the chair by the stove with his head on his arm, and Sam had taken himself quietly to his room, Ruth stood at the window with Grace and looked out at the dark and the snow and the particular stillness of a Wyoming winter night when the wind has gone and everything that was going to fall has fallen. Eli was at the table with a cup of coffee she'd made, without asking how he took it.
Strong, dark, exactly right. He noticed that the way he'd noticed it the first morning, and the noticing was different now than it had been then.
"Victor Crane came to see me in November," Ruth said. He looked at her. She was still facing the window. "I should have told you sooner," she said. "He came 3 weeks after Daniel died, which is either very efficient or very cruel depending on how you look at it." She shifted Grace against her shoulder. "He made an offer on the property, said he was representing a land development interest out of Denver, said the Wyoming Northern Rail Survey ran through the North Field, and that I'd do better to sell before the speculation drove the price up and then back down again." She paused. "He was very reasonable about it, very polite. He said he understood I'd had a loss, and he wasn't trying to pressure me. He was just making sure I had information." "But," Eli said, "but he came back 2 weeks later. Not as polite the second time." She turned from the window. Her eyes were clear and steady, and not frightened. "He said the offer had an expiration. He said a woman alone with children in a Wyoming winter was a difficult situation, and he hoped I'd considered all my options." She looked at Eli. He looked at the baby when he said it. At Grace. Same way a man looks at something he thinks is leverage. Eli's hands went still on the cup. "I told him to get off my property," Ruth said. "He left. He was polite about that, too." She came and sat across from Eli. "He'll be back. I've known that since October. A man like Crane doesn't make offers. He makes arrangements. And when one arrangement doesn't work, he finds another. Do you have the deed clear?" "Yes, Daniel registered it properly before he died. It's clean." "Railroad survey?" "Goes through the north corner of the field. Not the house, not the barn, but the north 40, which in 3 years will be worth more than the rest of the property combined if the survey holds." She looked at her hands on the table. "Which is why Crane wants me off it. Not out of a house, just gone. Unregistered, unclaimed, sold at a grief price to a widow who didn't know what she had." Eli looked at her. "Why didn't you tell me before?" "Because I'd known you 4 days," she said. "Because I've been managing things alone since October, and I am very—" She stopped. She started again with the specific precision of a woman choosing her words because the approximations weren't honest enough. "I am very careful about what I ask people for. I have been careful about it my whole life. Daniel used to say I carried my burdens like I was afraid someone would notice them and offer to help, and that the help would cost more than the weight." She looked at Eli. He was right.
He was right about most things.
He was right about that one, Eli said.
She held his gaze.
I'm telling you now.
I know.
Because you're going to be around the south fence and the north field, and you're going to need to know why the north field matters and what we're protecting it from.
Eli said.
She looked at him. The lamp caught her eyes, and they were clear and dark and direct and entirely sure of themselves.
She said.
And she said it the way she said true things, straight out, no ceremony, with the full weight of meaning it. He reached into his shirt pocket and put the badge on the table between them, the same way he had that afternoon. She looked at it.
Sheriff Tucker gets back Thursday, Eli said.
I'll ride in and talk to him. Put Crane's name on official record in this county before he makes his third visit. Makes the next move cost him more than he expected.
You think that'll stop him?
I think men like Crane are loyal to margins, not to causes. You make it expensive enough, he finds an easier target. He looked at the badge.
And he won't know what he's dealing with until he's already miscalculated.
Ruth looked at the badge for a long moment.
You were a good marshal, she said. Not a question.
I was.
What happened to Roy Deaver wasn't your fault.
She said it quietly, directly, with the tone of a woman who has thought about what to say and decided that the direct thing was the only honest thing. I don't know the details. I don't need them. But I know you. 4 days of you is enough to know that a man who sits up all night in a chair so a stranger can sleep in a bed is not a man responsible for other people's deaths. He's a man who tried. Eli was still.
I'm not saying it to make you feel better,
Ruth said. I'm saying it because it's true, and because I think you need to hear it from someone who has no reason to say it except that it's true. He looked at the table. He looked at the badge. He thought about Roy's voice, that particular, unhurried voice that had always sounded like a man with more time than he actually had, saying, "You're confusing punishment with wisdom." He thought about 7 years of the chair by the window. He thought about a room full of people, and how he had not, a single night in those 4 days, wanted to be anywhere else. "Roy told me something," he said, "before he died. He said that staying apart from the world wasn't noble. He said it was just easier, and calling it noble was the story a man tells himself when he doesn't want to look at what he's actually choosing." He picked up the badge. He held it in his palm and looked at it the way he'd looked at it that morning, with all 7 years of distance, and all 4 days of Ruth between him and the man who'd earned it. I've been choosing easier for a long time, telling myself it was wisdom. "And now?" Ruth said. He looked at her. "Now I'm choosing harder." The fire shifted in the stove. Grace made a small sound, and Ruth's hand went automatically to the baby's back. Outside, the Wyoming night was absolute and cold and infinite in the way only Winter Plains nights are, the stars hard and bright over all that white silence. "I'm going to need you to understand something," Eli said, "about how I do things. I'm not," he pressed his jaw, "I'm not easy. I've been alone long enough that the habits are in deep. I'll do things the wrong way sometimes. I'll go quiet when I should talk. I'll do the practical version of a thing when the human version is what's needed." He held her gaze. "I'm not telling you this as a warning. I'm telling you because you deserve to know what you're dealing with." Ruth looked at him steadily. "Eli," she said, "I was married to a man for 11 years. I know what it is to learn someone." She shifted Grace against her shoulder. "Daniel was patient and loud, and he laughed at everything. And sometimes he made decisions without asking me. And sometimes he asked me about things he'd already decided and pretended he hadn't." She paused. He was the best man I've ever known, and he was also sometimes the most infuriating. She held Eli's gaze. I'm not looking for easy. I had easy, and I lost it. And I spent 60 days after losing it, understanding that easy was never what made it worth having. What made it worth having was real. She looked at the badge in his hand. You're real, Eli. 4 days of real is worth more than a year of comfortable. He closed his fingers around the badge. The bedroom door opened, and Sam came out in his socks, carrying his letter folded in his hand. He looked at both of them at the table, and he took in whatever was between them with that dark, measuring intelligence. And he filed it in whatever place he filed things he wasn't ready to address directly. I finished the letter, he said. He held it up. I want to put it in the box with the others. The box is on the high shelf. Ruth started to stand. Eli was already up. He took the letter from Sam's hand and went to the shelf and put it in the tin box where Ruth kept the others. He'd seen it the first morning without registering what it was, and set the box back and came back to the table. Sam watched him do it. Something in the boy's face opened in a way it hadn't before. Not a lot, just the fraction that means something has been granted that the person didn't know they needed. He looked at his mother. I'm going back to sleep, he said. Good night, Sam. He went to the door of his room. He stopped with his hand on the frame, and he didn't turn around, and he said, in a voice that was careful and plain and cost him exactly what it cost, Good night, Mr. Harding. It was the first time he had said it. He had said good morning, and he had said sir, and he had said thank you once with difficulty. But he had not said good night, and the good night was different from all of those, and everyone in the room understood why. Good night, Sam, Eli said. The door closed. Ruth was looking at the door with her mouth pressed together and her eyes bright. The specific expression of a mother watching her child do something she didn't teach him and couldn't have predicted, and would remember for the rest of her life. She looked at Eli. Thursday, she said. Her voice was steady. After you talk to Tucker, come for supper. I'll bring the bracing timber for the barn. You'll bring it Saturday, when Sam can watch and learn how it's done. She held his gaze. Thursday you come for supper because I asked you to, not to fix something, not because something needs doing. She paused. Because you're our neighbor, and supper is at 6. He looked at her for a long moment. 6, he said. She nodded. 6. He put on his coat, and he took the badge from his palm, and he pinned it to the inside of his coat pocket. Not displayed, not hidden. Just there, in the place where he could reach it when the time came for it to be visible again. He picked up his hat. Hank was still asleep in the chair, mouth open, entirely untroubled by the world. Grace had settled into the basket with the blue scarf tucked around her. Daniel's scarf. The one Ruth had wrapped her in on the worst night of the blizzard, and every night since. The lamp made everything in the room warm and close and specific. Eli stood at the door. Ruth, he said. She looked at him. What you said about Roy. He said it level and plain, and it cost him more than almost anything he'd said in 4 days. Thank you. She held his gaze. I meant it. I know you did. He opened the door. That's why it mattered. He rode home under the Wyoming stars, with the badge against his ribs and the cold coming up through his coat, and the sound of the horse on frozen ground, the only sound in all that white silence. He thought about 6 o'clock Thursday. He thought about south fencing and north fields, and a tin box of letters to a dead man on a high shelf. He thought about Sam's voice saying good night, Mr. Harding, with the particular cost of a boy who had decided, carefully and not without difficulty, that a man was worth saying it to. He got home, and he unsaddled Ranger, and he put him up for the night, and he went inside to the house that had been a structure for 7 years, and he built the fire up, and he sat at the table where he'd eaten alone 1,000 times, and he did not think about the empty chair, because the chair was not empty in any way that mattered anymore. He reached into his pocket and took out the badge and set it on the table in front of him, in the light where he could look at it. He looked at it for a long time. He thought about Roy. He said, in the empty room, quiet and plain and without apology, "You were right." He said it the way Sam wrote his letters, into the air, toward the person who wasn't there, trusting that some things reach where they're intended, even when the distance is the kind that can't be measured. The fire held. The house held. Outside, the winter night pressed down on 40 acres that had been his silence and his penance and his particular arrangement with the world. And the arrangement was changing. And the changing was not the disaster he had spent 7 years bracing for. It was just the next thing. It was just what came after the long stillness, when a person finally puts down what they've been carrying long enough to find out what their hands are free to hold. Eli Harding had spent 7 years building walls against the world. What he understood now, sitting at his own table with a federal marshal's badge in the lamplight, and supper at 6 on Thursday, and south fencing to do on the weekend, was that the walls had never been as solid as he'd believed, and the world had never been as dangerous as he'd feared. And the man on the other side of both of those things was not a ghost, or a ruin, or a cautionary tale. He was just a man who had finally, with a particular grace of something that could not be rushed, and could not be forced, and could only arrive in its own time, come home.